Hello detectives, I love sharing my passion with you all. If you'd like to keep up with my adventures, hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. It was February 1959, at an icy mountain pass near Siberia. 9 hikers had gone missing there recently, and the rescuers arrived to find 5 bodies scattered about, some burned, some nearly naked. One had human flesh in his mouth. There was no apparent cause of death, and all 9 hikers were quite experienced. So why had they abandoned their tent and run half naked into the forest? Had there been an accident? Were they attacked? No one knew. And for 6 decades, those unanswered questions provoked fierce debate and dark conspiracy theories among locals, the Russian equivalent of Roswell. In 1959, a 23-year-old Russian engineering student named Igor Dyatlov recruited 8 university friends for an expedition. He wanted to climb a peak in the remote Ural Mountains. The team ranged in age from 20 to 24 and included 2 women. The Soviet government also sent along a 38-year-old minder, making 10 people total. All were experienced skiers and winter campers. They were unbelievably tough as well. On a previous expedition, a hunter accidentally blasted one of them with his shotgun. Instead of waiting for a medevac helicopter, she hopped right up and cheerfully skied 50 miles to the nearest clinic. No sweat. That toughness would prove necessary on Igor Dyatlov's expedition, because they planned to visit the Ural Mountains in February, the harshest time of year there. Despite the danger, the hikers had a grand time on the train trip out. They hid beneath the seats to avoid paying for tickets. One brought a mandolin, which he strummed for everyone to pass the time. After the train, they took a series of buses, trucks, and horse-drawn sleighs to a frontier village. At this point, one hiker bowed out. He was having knee pain, and he told the others to continue without him. He never saw them alive again. The trek began January 28th. It would be 215 miles round trip. The landscape was mostly rolling forests of birch, fir, and cedar trees. The snow was piled pretty deep in places, up to 5 feet. Wind gusts reached 60 miles per hour. On February 1st, the team tried to cross a treeless pass between 2 mountains. One mountain was named Kolet Saikal, or Dead Mountain. The crossing should have been an easy ski, but a blizzard swept in and disoriented them. Instead of slipping through the pass, they ended up climbing the lower slope of Dead Mountain. They realized their error near nightfall. At this point, Igor Dyatlov decided not to retreat down slope a mile, where a forest offered shelter. His team had already climbed pretty high. He didn't want to have to regain the elevation tomorrow. Instead, they would camp on Dead Mountain. Eventually, the searchers found 3 more bodies scattered nearby, including Igor Dyatlov. All 3 victims had been trekking uphill, probably toward the tent. But they never made it in the blizzard and froze to death. Search as they might, the rescuers could not find the other 4 bodies. So they dug out the tent and helicoptered everything back to a police station. There, they examined those mysterious slashes in the tent walls. It seemed like evidence of a crime. But that day, a seamstress happened to be visiting the station to mend some police uniforms. She examined the slashes herself and declared that Nyet, the officers were wrong. Her expert eye could see that no one had slashed into the tent. Instead, the campers had slashed their way out. This baffled the police further. Why would experienced winter campers do that? Autopsies soon revealed that all 5 had died of hypothermia. Meanwhile, a few months later, a hunter passed through the forest beneath Dead Mountain. There he came across a strange pit 10 feet deep and 250 yards from where the first bodies were found. Peering down, he saw a bed of tree branches as well as scraps of clothing. He alerted rescuers, who returned to the scene. They probed around the pit with long poles which emerged with chunks of human flesh attached. They quickly dug out the 4 missing bodies. All 4 were lying face down in a buried creek. But that wasn't all. The first 5 bodies had all been relatively intact and uninjured. Not these 4. Autopsies revealed cracked ribs and fractured skulls. One man had shards of bone driven into his brain. More gruesomely, their faces were missing eyeballs, tongues, and lips. 2 of the hikers were wearing clothes from their dead comrades. At this point, for unknown reason, Soviet Party officials swept in and shut the investigation down. They declared that an avalanche had killed the party, then confiscated all documents related to the matter. But that explanation didn't sit right with people. Hunters who lived near Dead Mountain had never seen an avalanche there. Plus, avalanches leave obvious signs afterward: acres of dislodged snow. But the rescue team had seen no such signs when they arrived. There were other anomalies too. Avalanches won't fall unless the snow is sitting on a slope steeper than 30 degrees. But the slope where the hikers camped was gentler than that. Also, avalanche victims rarely die of blunt force trauma, they suffocate. But the 4 buried victims had shown blunt force trauma. Why? Overall, the avalanche explanation seemed bogus. And the more Soviet officials insisted on it, the more people suspected a cover-up. The Swiss scientists began to suspect that a slab avalanche had hit the hikers. So they tried modeling one on a computer. But this proved tricky. The physics of snow is surprisingly complicated. Luckily, around this time, Gaim watched the Disney movie Frozen. The special effects impressed him. The tumbling snow looked quite realistic. So he reached out to the film's animators, who agreed to hand over the code they used. With this code, the scientists began running simulations. To their delight, the slab avalanche looked promising as a theory. They proposed that the hikers, in digging out their hollow, had disturbed the slab of snow over the rotten ice. And when the slab eventually shifted, the snow buried the hikers. Even a 3-foot thick slab would have pinned them down under 1,000 pounds of crushing weight. That explained why the hikers slashed their way out of the tent. The door flaps were blocked. It also explained why several of them fled without boots or coats. It was hard enough getting their own bodies out. They probably couldn't even find their boots and coats in the buried tent. Now, however exciting, a slab avalanche couldn't explain everything. What about the other 4 hikers with the skull and rib fractures? Avalanches don't normally cause blunt force trauma. To answer this mystery, the Swiss duo looked into some macabre experiments from Detroit. In the 1970s, car makers there took 100 cadavers and slammed weights into them at different speeds. They were investigating car accidents and using the data to design better seatbelts. In the report, the Swiss duo noticed that some of the cadavers had been propped against rigid backgrounds. And crucially, those cadavers had worse injuries. That was a big clue. Remember, the battered hikers were found in a 10-foot deep pit with branches across the bottom. What if they'd been digging a shelter and laid the branches as a floor? And what if the shelter collapsed on them? Several tons of snow would have slammed into the branches. In that case, blunt force trauma seemed likely. The last remaining obstacle to the scientists' theory was a big one: that locals had never seen an avalanche on Dead Mountain. So the duo hired some guides and visited the site to investigate. It was a rough journey there. The wind was so fierce on the way that their snowmobile actually flipped over. But they persevered. At Dead Mountain Pass, they flew drones over to capture aerial footage. And lo and behold, one camera captured exactly the type of avalanche they'd predicted: a small slab one. To be fair, locals had never seen an avalanche because slab avalanches are tiny. Plus, wind tends to cover them up. Remember, the 1959 rescue party didn't reach the scene until 26 days after the disaster, at which point 0 trace remained. So that explains 2 of the deaths. And either before or after those 2 died, 3 other hikers set out to find the buried tent and grab jackets, boots, and blankets. But in the dark blizzard, they got separated, and each one froze to death alone. That left 4 hikers alive. Eventually, they left their dead companions, hiked into the woods, and began digging a snow pit for protection. This included laying down pine branches, but more bad luck doomed them. They happened to dig over a local stream that never freezes. The stream had hollowed out a tunnel of ice a dozen feet below, and after they climbed down into the pit, that ice tunnel collapsed, and the overlying snow crushed them against the branches. That explains the trauma to their heads and chests. As for why they were missing parts of their faces again, they were found lying face down in the stream. Their tissue probably either rotted off or small animals burrowed down and scavenged them before the rescue team arrived in May. Overall, the hikers' expertise probably doomed them. Experienced winter campers fear avalanches more than almost anything. So after the slab avalanche hit, the hikers hurried downhill, probably fearing a second, bigger avalanche. That was a textbook smart decision. Usually. But that second avalanche never came. Ironically, if they'd been inexperienced amateurs and just stayed put, they maybe could have dug their tent out and survived. Now, some people in Russia refuse to abandon their conspiracy theories here. They continue to blame Yetis or the CIA for the deaths on Dead Mountain, or, as the area is known today, Dyatlov Pass, after the expedition's leader. But most experts agree that the Swiss team of Puzrin and Gam has solved the mystery. They've given the families of the victims closure at last, and closed the books on one of the strangest adventure tales of the 20th century.